Good morning, guys. My name is Brian. I'm a science teacher. I'm a recovering addict who has been on and off of benzos and opioids for 15 going on 20 years. I'm currently tapering off of methadone, and I run an addiction and recovery blog called the Concrete Confessional Blog. So again, I'm tapering off of methadone right now, and that process is starting to get a little hairy. I made a video about that a couple of days ago, and when I made that video, I was totally exhausted from lack of sleep, and I was feeling it. I was not doing so well. This morning, I am feeling much better. I was able to get a solid 4 or 5 hours of rest last night. I woke up early, and 2:30, 3 a.m. ish, and I was feeling well enough to go for a run before I go to the clinic to dose at around 5:30. Which that has only happened a handful of times before because especially further along into this taper, I am feeling enough withdrawal symptoms intensely enough that for the final hours before I go to dose, exercise, at least sort of like aerobic exercise, is unthinkable most days. So again, this feels like a good day. I hope it continues, and I appreciate all the support from all of you. So what I'm going to talk about today is stimulant psychosis, and I'm going to use a conversation with my good friend Nate to illustrate what was going on in someone who is in this state, to talk a little bit about what factors I was weighing in my own mind as I was responding and trying to help him, and to just sort of let you all know how I got through this situation. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. I'm not giving medical advice, of course. Again, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just sharing as a layperson when this situation came into my life, how I responded to it. And I hope that if any of you ever end up in a similar situation, maybe hearing some of what I have to say might help. Now, if someone is in full-blown stimulant psychosis, they need medical help in all likelihood to get out of it. Okay, so I'm going to back up for a second here and talk about what it actually is. So stimulant psychosis is when you have a break with reality. So maybe you have delusions. They can be delusions of persecution or religious delusions or delusions of many other types. And together with that, you have audio, visual, tactile hallucinations. So you lose touch with reality. Okay, you kind of become in your own nightmare in a waking state. So stimulant psychosis can be caused by multiple substances. The most common are the amphetamines, so either prescription drugs like At.I or methamphetamine, which of course is typically it's bought on the illegal drug market. So some of the other most commonly abused substances that can lead to stimulant psychosis are the cathinones, so drugs like alpha PVP, like mephedrone, like MDPV. Those have a relatively high risk of triggering this phenomenon. Also, cocaine can cause it, but for a lot of different reasons, not as common. So what typically happens is you'll see someone who is pretty far along in their stimulant addiction, and they will say, let's just take meth as an example. They will go on a meth binge, and for the first 24 hours they're okay. By the time they get to 36 to 48 hours, let's say, they start seeing things in their peripheral vision, kind of the early onset fight club fleeting hallucination kind of deal, and then after 48 hours they start to hear things and they see things, they can discern more, and it's in their primary field of vision, not just in their peripheral vision. So as you get into 72 hours and beyond, oftentimes without enough food and hydration, and again, total lack of sleep, the hallucinations get more encompassing and they get more believable. So to the person experiencing them, this can seem as real as any other aspect of the world that we're living in and interacting with all day, every day. And one of the most common hallucinations involves shadow people, who can be just sort of like a dark smudge in your peripheral vision, or they can be very well defined right in front of you. They can sometimes, people describe interacting with them and not necessarily hearing them out loud, but thinking that they're planning thoughts in their head. So communicating back and forth in that way. And the shadow people, although they don't typically have like features that are discernible, they can, have pretty well delineated forms that are very humanoid. So these shadow people hallucinations are very, very common. They have been seen by stimulant abusers all over the world. There are people who believe that they are demonic, and even though I don't personally believe that, I can totally see why people would think that. You know, the amphetamines, it's hard to understand if you haven't tried substances, but the amphetamines to me, they always felt like just evil substances. Again, it's you gotta have felt it to know it, but the things they make people do, so people get so incredibly, they have a really high libido, but they don't want normal like human connection or even just pleasure-based sex. Like they want the most dark, degrading, like fetishized, just gross kind of hookup, and they will do almost anything to get that. And again, it's like it is using another person as an object. Best case scenario, it's a really, if you know, you know, it's a really gross kind, a really gross kind of way of thinking about someone else who you're interacting with in this way. Let's put it that way. And not only that, but again, stimulant psychosis involves delusions, often delusions that are religious in nature, or delusions of persecution and paranoia, or both. So they get these ideas in their head. Like a very common one is that their partner or their family members are poisoning them or are setting them up to get in some kind of huge legal trouble. So if you think about, hypothetically, if Descartes' evil genie or evil demon hypothesis was real, these are exactly the kind of thoughts that spiritual entity would be putting in your mind to ruin your soul and to get you to hurt yourself and other people. So again, to me, I have very limited experience with amphetamines. I've only taken prescription amphetamines, have taken them at high dosages, but only a dozen or so times in my life, and I just had the vibe that they were evil. Like the things that they bring out in you are scary. So a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah, that's stimulant psychosis. And the thing about it is that typically if the binge ends, again, especially if someone hasn't been doing this and abusing their body in this way for years and years, the binge ends, they go to sleep, they wake up, they get them some food in them, and they're not in stimulant psychosis anymore. That is the most common pattern. But with time, your brain can't take unlimited abuse. And so with time, people find, especially again with the amphetamines and the cathinones, that they wake up and they're still in it. The hallucinations, the delusions, all of the other symptoms have not abated. So in that case, what you need is medical treatment for that person. They need antipsychotics, and those antipsychotics are pretty effective, not necessarily after the first dose, but after a few weeks to a few months, they tend to really rein in the psychotic symptoms. Okay, but there is a group of people, a small proportion of people with stimulant psychosis who it is permanent for. I was watching a long time ago certain prison YouTuber's description of a woman who she was locked up with, and this was an older woman who had a long history of meth abuse, and she would often just suddenly stop what she was doing and go like this. She'd be swatting at something that no one else could see, and it turned out, she explained it to another prisoner, and it turned out she was swatting at birds, like Hitchcock horror movie style, and that she had been seeing these birds for years, ever since she got a hot shot, which usually means like a bad batch of meth, and this created permanent stimulant psychosis in her. So really scary stuff. Again, if I'm not giving advice, but if someone around you is in stimulant psychosis, they can be dangerous. And particularly if you've got young people around, you got to get yourself and the young people out of that situation. You got to get the person who's in stimulant psychosis help. But you don't want to just randomly call the cops or an ambulance on them without them knowing, because that can suddenly the situation can pop off in the worst way. And again, people in the state, they believe that people are trying to end them. So because of that, they can turn violent relatively easily, and they will have extreme physical strength because of the effects of the substances they're on, and they will not have their normal inhibitions for the same reason. So please be careful. Remember that someone in stimulant psychosis is always potentially dangerous, and you need to look out for your own safety, and especially the safety of young people and other people who can't fend for themselves before all other priorities, okay? It's touchy. It's case by case to interact with someone and try to talk them out of that. But I'm going to share an example now of exactly that type of scenario and how I got through it. So the screenshots that I'm going to share with you all are with my friend Nate, who is someone I met in long-term rehab in upstate New York. We became pretty good friends after that. Nate is a really smart guy. He was in school to become a CASAC, a credentialed alcohol and substance abuse counselor. So he's a guy who knows a lot about addiction, who was working in the treatment field at one point. But for the past few years, he has been in and out of relapse. been having a really hard time, and right now he is in recovery. He is on methadone maintenance, and he's in a sort of a sober living situation, doing the things that he needs to do for his young daughter so that he can be the best possible dad for her. And I have no doubt that Nate will be the kindest, like, wisest, most amazing dad. Like, he has such a sweet heart. So he also, one of the things that I know that has motivated him to get back into recovery is that not the mother of his daughter, but the partner who he was with for the longest, whose name was Daisy, she passed away of an overdose. I believe it was a speedball overdose just a few weeks before he went back into treatment, which was a few months ago now. So that's my friend Nate. So smart guy, good guy, handsome guy. I've already written about this for my blog. I sent him the article. I told him what he deserves for being so annoying to me. So he's fine with me sharing these screenshots and fine with me talking about this. Like, he knows about this, or else I wouldn't do it. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the conversation. So I'll show you the first screenshot. And what I realized right away was that this was happening at 6:30 in the morning. As you guys know, if you've watched my videos for a while, I am up always by 4 or 5 a.m. Nate's not that kind of guy. So when I saw a message at 6:30, I thought maybe he wanted to borrow money, or maybe we've used together when we've relapsed. So I thought maybe he, something like that, he was going to offer to get stuff for us. But I knew it was probably not Nate in his ordinary state. So this is how the conversation starts. He messages me and I tell him Happy Father's Day, because it happens to be Father's Day, okay? And before almost anything else happens in the conversation, he sends me a picture of him with his girlfriend with her head against his shoulder, kind of kissing him on the cheek, okay? So I tell him Happy Father's Day, and Nate responds with, Brian, zoom in to the left of my ex's head. There's a guy right next to her in my effing car. Okay, so I know what this is about right away. And if you've been through this with a friend or a partner or a family member, whoever, it gets so old to deal with this again and again and again. So again, if you know, you know. But so right away, I know he's in stimulant psychosis. I say, Nate, please don't get mad at me for saying this, but you only do this picture shadow stuff when you've done too many uppers. He says, Brian, look at that. I say, Nate, I promise you just need sleep. So this had happened at least once before, maybe 2 times before, and I had just sort of brushed it off at that point and ended the conversation. And then a couple days later, Nate was looking through his messages. He saw it. He was embarrassed. He messaged me and apologized, and we both laughed it off together. You know, I'm used to dealing with this stuff. I've dealt with addiction in myself, in my family, and my partners my entire life. So. All right, so my first strategy is I try to remind him of that, you know, that this has happened before, and that he realized that it was BS when he got some sleep and woke back up, that he had been, having psychotic symptoms, and that he eventually ended up laughing at himself. Okay, so I'm going to show you, this is a full version of the picture that he's referencing. It's a picture where he was in his car with his ex, and because of that, it's low light. It was taken at night. And of course, there are windows all around him, as well as a couple of mirrored surfaces. So it's a very dark environment that caused a very... It's reflective, and because of that, there were a lot of smudges. So he kept telling me to look, Brian, look at the upper left-hand corner. He got so frustrated. He thought it was very clear that there was a face there. To me, I do see a smudge there. I actually see 2 or 3 smudges. To me, it looks, if anything, it looks like a crab claw coming out of the screen with a couple of, just sort of randomly shaped shadows underneath. I know some of you are going to see this and say, I see it too, like the face was there, he wasn't hallucinating. Like, guys, I promise you he's hallucinating because of the drugs. Like, it's like a Rorschach ink blot test, right? Like, you see, what you see says a lot about your psyche. And in this case, even me prompting you with the word shadow and face has already made you unable to look at the smudge and see it for what you would normally interpret it as. So even if you believe in sort of supernatural phenomena, like, I promise you, it was the drugs in this case. So, all right, so there's a picture just so that you can make your own judgment. And again, I'm just reminding Nate that, yes, he's absolutely convinced that there was a spectral face floating in the upper left quadrant of this photo, but like, we've been through this before. Just trying to convince him of that. So he's getting frustrated. He sends the picture again. He circles that area in the upper left, the top left hand corner, where he thinks he sees a face. To me, again, it looks like a crab claw or maybe a very weirdly shaped silhouette of an entire humanoid form. But anyway, so he messaged me and he says, "How can you not see the head? I'll outline it for you." So he's brightening it, he's changing the contrast, and guys, people on stimulants get very focused, they get very intense, and they get very, very obsessive. This kind of conversation, if you've ever lived with a tweaker, this kind of conversation could go on for hours and hours and hours. And even if you talk the person out of it one time, they can go right back into it and say, but look at this one. Look at this one. See, it wasn't the upper left. It was the upper right. I was wrong. They were tricking me. All right. So you got to have a lot of patience, a lot of ability to talk to someone who's on a different plane of reality than you to deal with this. Okay, so now he's telling me, shit, I brightened it and you can clearly see it. Hold on. So now I'm just pulling. I don't think anything's going to help, but I'm just pulling different tricks out of my hat. So now I'm trying to appeal to an outside authority. So I'm saying, I just showed my older brother. He can't see it either. There's a tiny light smudge along the left upper part of the frame. Nothing that looks remotely like a head. I said, be very careful, Nate. You've been up for too long. I think you did coke or Molly or something. I said, or I just, as a throwaway, I said, or maybe it's just not coming across because of my picture quality. So predictably, this appeal to the outside authority, meaning my older brother, just falls flat. He is convinced of this and he's getting increasingly, just annoyed. I'm trying really hard to be gentle and not to get him overly defensive. So I'm getting a little frustrated too. So I say, dude, and Nate says, open that, make it big. I said, I cannot see a thing. It is literally a green outline of a pitch black area. He says, bro, you're really smart. He's using the wrong yard, by the way. So, bro, you're really smart, but you're not even looking. I said, Nate, I enlarged it to the maximum enlargement. He says, you have to be glancing, which I said, I am looking. I said, Nate, you did this once before, remember? And afterward, the next day, you agreed that you couldn't see anything. So, okay, I am just repeating the same tactics. Okay, so the best thing you can do, in my opinion, is in this kind of situation is redirect, just to try to get the person's mind on something else entirely. If you know anything that they're interested in, anything that would be more positive and less delusional to talk about, try to leverage that stimulant obsessiveness to your own advantage. So I kept bringing up Father's Day and his daughter because I know he loves to talk about his daughter. He's a loving dad. He loves to show me the pictures of her, talk about the milestones that she's passing and all of this stuff. So I brought up Father's Day a couple other days or a couple other times. I asked him, what are you doing today? Do you have plans to visit and to celebrate? So the best thing you can do is just get someone on a different track. And that was not working with him. And this is a little bit of an aside, but in my 20s, I'm convinced that one of the reasons I stayed relatively clear of legal trouble is that I had this rule like, thou shalt not abide a tweaker. Okay, addiction is addiction. I have nothing but bottomless compassion for people addicted to any substance, but tweakers are a different breed. Again, when you think about this toxic stew of symptoms that they get, days of not sleeping, no food, no water, hyperthermia, the body temperature gets up, they're cooking their brain proteins are literally denaturing, they get incredible speed and strength, they get the worst kind of persecutory delusions, they get grandiose about they're the one there to save the universe. I mean, these things sound almost like things you would make up, but they're reality for tweakers. And they have this obsessiveness, but it's not like they can sit and do something productive for 10, 12 hours. At least if they are a constructive tweaker, that ends after only a few weeks of their addiction. Like once you get into it, it's so unpredictable. Yeah, they will, like someone said, my first dealer said it perfectly. He was an opioid addict, but when he had lived out in the Southwest for a while, he got bad into meth. And he said, so he had some training as an electrician. And he said, I would go to fix the plastic plate that goes over the outlet. And I would buy a new one. I would get my screwdriver out. And 2 days later, I would come back to reality with literally the entire wall torn apart so that I could rewire a whole room of my house. So it's obsessiveness, but it's obsessiveness that's thinking is going all over the place. Tweakers lose their inhibitions. They get incredibly overconfident. They get violent. Okay, a lot of the worst war crimes I talked about in my first installment of our druggy book club, which was a book by German journalist Norman Ohler, which is called Blitz, Drugs in the First Reich. And what he talks about is that a lot of the worst war crimes happen when soldiers are on amphetamines. And the same principle applies for everyday civilian behavior, that tweakers get obsessive, they have no sleep. Again, they get very paranoid. And because of that, like they do everything in the stupidest way possible. There is zero chill around tweakers. Like, they are always plotting something that commit the stupidest kinds of crime. The overconfidence in the sort of obsessive thinking ahead gets them to do just crimes that all I can put it is they aren't worth it for anyone involved. It's disproportionately likely that they'll get caught. When they do, these are crimes that like certain kinds of theft that carry really serious sentences, and again, they often become violent. So if you are an addict, stay away from tweakers. If they are a different breed, again, it can be really dangerous to be around. And even if it's not dangerous, I don't know how anyone enjoys any high around someone in that state. It bothers me just to be around someone on that wavelength. So rant over. It is an awful thing to be addicted to amphetamines or other cathinones. And yeah, so it can be really hard to get someone, off of an obsessive track when they're in stimulant psychosis. But I was trying to, in this case with Nate, leverage that stimulant obsessiveness, or that stimulant mind bouncing around effect, to get him on something else, okay? And it just was not working, okay? So again, we're going back and forth. I'm telling him I've enlarged it to the maximum extent. I'm still looking. I said, I did this with you once before, and you woke up the next day, you looked through your messages, you were embarrassed, you apologized, you said you wouldn't do it again, and you agreed that there was absolutely nothing there. So none of that is working, and we go back and forth a broken record for a little, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. So at the end, I'm thinking, well, what can I do here? There are basically three choices, okay? One is just to end the conversation, to say, I can't talk with you right now, okay? The other is to just sort of I guess the way I would summarize it is just to challenge the conversation, to say, I don't see anything, and maybe to end it by saying, I don't want to talk about this before. So I've already tried redirecting. The other option is to end it and to shut it down by saying, I don't see anything. The third possibility is to capitulate, to say, I can see it now. Okay, you won. I can see it. Now, I wouldn't normally do this, but I went with option 3. I told Nate, oh, okay, I can kind of see what you're talking about. It does look a little bit like a face. And so right away, he's like, victorious. He's like, yes, see, I told you. And I followed up right away with, okay, so what's the significance of that? What do you want to do about it? And it was almost comical how much he hadn't thought about that. As soon as I gave in, he says oh, I don't really know. I mean, I've been having this happen to me a lot lately. And I said, oh, that's weird. It just seems like a strange thing. Maybe they're ghosts or something. And Nate said, yeah, right. It's the weirdest thing. And then we redirected and started talking about all the other stuff that had happened since we last spoke. So again, I wouldn't necessarily give in to the person's hallucinations. That can be dangerous. So I read about one case where someone thought that there was a shadow person hidden underneath a pile of clothes in the corner of the room that they were in, and they shot at it, and they actually hit a young person who had been sleeping on those clothes because there wasn't a mattress in the house at the time. So you don't necessarily want to, to bolster someone's confidence in their hallucinations, because that can lead to even worse outcomes. But with Nate, there were a couple of things that, mainly about his underlying character, that made me believe that he was going to be fairly chill about this. So what I mean by that is he's just one of the most even-keeled guys that you have ever met, and he is super not physically aggressive. So again, substances can change those things fundamentally, but I had a really strong hunch that once I just gave him what he wanted, like it would have been different if he was saying, they're here, they're trying to hurt me. My family sent them to hurt me. Like I probably would have called an ambulance to his house if that happened, and I was alarmed enough, right? But that's not what he was saying. It was all like presenting a court case to me to convince me that what he was seeing was real, okay? So I had a very strong hunch that once I gave him that, this whole psychological force that is motivating this whole thing would dissipate. And that ended up exactly being the case. So again, if he had been saying, they're here, they're going to hurt me, and I had sort of like co-signed that, then he might have thought, okay, I got to defend myself. And that could have led in a horrible direction. But again, based on his underlying personality and just my own intuition, after decades of dealing with people on different substances, I thought that capitulating was probably the most effective way to end this for me and for him. And it was. Okay, so blessedly he accepted, that I was saying, okay, maybe it's there. And at that point, he literally, again, it was comical how quickly it became a non-issue. So in this case, he was able to get some rest. I talked to him again a couple days later, and he's he's totally back to reality. So no psychotic symptoms whatsoever. And this isn't something that, to my knowledge, has happened to him again since then. So he's lucky, and I've told him that. What's really interesting is that when people start having these stimulant psychosis episodes and they happen more than once, they start getting patterns with what they're seeing. It's not random and it's not different every time. So with Nate, it was always these spectral faces specifically, and it often had to do, actually every time I can think of that he told me about, it had to do with this particular ex-girlfriend. So like a Walmart level psychological reading would be maybe that these ghosts or these demons that he's seeing are sort of like how do I want to describe this? It's like the spirits that possessed his ex to break up with him, which is something that he saw as an irrational act, given that they were very much in love. So they're sort of like the demons of their relationship are manifesting physically, according to what he's seeing and the world he's interacting with. So it's really telling. If you ever get a chance to talk to people about what they used to hallucinate about or what delusions they used to believe when they were in stimulant psychosis, it says so much about their psyche, about their values, about traumatic experiences that they've had. It's actually really cool from a psychological standpoint. So again, most of the time stimulant psychosis goes away with antipsychotic treatment, but worst case scenario, it can be permanent. So look out for yourself, look out for your friends, and if you're in a situation with someone who's in stimulant psychosis, it can be very unpredictable and very dangerous, and you need to get them some medical help in a way that doesn't put gasoline on the fire. So anyway, just kind of, life has never been boring for me, not one day, even before I started getting into drugs because of the big sort of Irish Catholic clan that I came from on one side of my family, which is filled with like eccentric, brilliant, beautiful people, and this very, sort of also interesting, in some ways dark Italian Catholic side of my family as well. So life has always been interesting. For me, I hope it always is. And yeah, I keep showing up for the ride for a reason, even though right now, I'm feeling the withdrawal from the methadone pretty bad from time to time. So thank you again for the support, and I will catch you guys next time.